Good morning, everyone. What's going on this Monday? It's a new week, it's a new beginning. I think those of you that pretty much had a bad week last week, this is a refresh, it's a new start. I think this is the week that you stay a little bit patient. I will say, though, I mean, our outlook for the upside after what we had a pretty decent rally, pretty decent run of recovering a lot of these losses over the prior weeks, basically. I will say that it looks like it is coming to an end. The biggest thing going forward to the outlook of this week is having inflation data. All right. So that's the biggest thing that we're going to have coming into Thursday is going to be when we have our inflation data. We already saw the debacle out of Jay Powell, in which it looks like we are about to run. He dropped a little bit of a news bomb on us, not giving us a proper outlook on how much more the rate hikes were going to continue to steadily increase and for how much longer. That gave us a little bit of a downfall, and that's what we ended up getting a nice little reversal off of that to close out last week. So going into this week structurally here, as I kind of just give you a little bit of a gist, and then we can get into some little details, some headlines, some individual names, just to keep on the radar here. All right. But looking at futures, you can see a little bit of a rising wedge type of action that's taking place. Structurally, looking at the hourly here, I want to say it could be possible that we're making a little bit of a little tilted head and shoulders action. As you see this little descending channeling action I have, kind of outlines this little tilted head and shoulder neckline is what I'm looking at. But this little right shoulder, if we end up breaking down off of this little leading diagonal rising wedge action, that could potentially be the downfall that ends up setting us up for this head and shoulders to play out towards the downside. So that's something that's in my mind right now, just structurally how we're kind of setting up moving forward towards that inflation data here on Thursday. All right. But again, what's going on, Roy, Cash, Charles, and Lobo? What's going on? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. But as I mentioned here, looking to see this right shoulder, here's the tricky part about this morning, and this is where we're likely going to end up seeing whether it be a little morning spike or a morning little wick to the downside here out of the gate. This is where it's going to be a little bit more tricky because you can see the little bit of range that you have as this rising wedge is closing in. So key levels to be watching here towards the downside. Look to see if you get out of the opening bell here. If we tap support at 37.82, that may end up being our potential morning support, in which case now we have all this room to the upside here towards the resistance of this rising wedge that we could potentially see a little bit of a upside action for most, if not all of the day, trending up towards 38.30. All right. Otherwise, you're gonna of course you're also gonna be looking at, as long as you hold the 37.82, you're topping the ranges where you see this hourly double top sitting, which is above 38.05 for continuation to the upside, and that would set you up for your entire potential trend day in the green territory. All right. Otherwise, downside now we're looking is you look to break support below 37.82. Now we're going to start to flirt with bigger levels to the downside, and we're going to see how much more we escalate. So I'm going to look for the breakdown below 37.82, but I believe it rather escalates below 37.66. That's when we're going to start to see it speed up towards the downside. Otherwise, if we end up chopping between this area of 37.66 to 37.81 or 37.82, I believe that's going to be a little bit of a range that we're likely going to end up seeing us just chop for most of the day, as the market may not particularly pick a direction here. All right, so that's going to be my bigger concern if we end up chopping between 37.82 to 37.66. That's going to be my chop range that I'm more so concerned about. But playing it level by level, if we hold 37.82 here this morning, I'm going to look to see if I get into a call scalp this morning, as it's not going to be just a quick flush, I believe in my estimation, that we're just going to drop right to the downside off of this rising wedge. We may end up continuing to chop, continuing to push again where that double top is at the 38.05. We may see us test that resistance yet again, and then see if we get one more big push to the upside towards that 38.30. As the bigger headlines as well, individually name speaking, you're going to be watching for is looking to see Apple. We already saw Apple this morning down about 2% at one point, rather earlier on the news of their China production being delayed, blaming it on COVID, stating the fact that's basically the reason why they're having somewhat of a shortage of their iPhones. So that's something you're going to monitor. Look to see how much more of a recovery that is going to take place. I'll get to that Apple chart in a second. The other thing to keep an eye on is you also did see some news around Meta. Meta actually reporting that they're going to be getting some they're going to basically be releasing some of their workers. And so what that does is just knowing the fact that Meta is just been a cash, it's been burning cash left and right between ads, between trying to get their involvement with the metaverse, between their pretty much just I want to say their commercials or they're spending up for that. It's been a lot of things that just are been burning cash flow. So the fact that they're cutting employees, they're going to be letting people go. I think that was actually something positive, and it was up roughly about a dollar and some change. But that's something to monitor to see if that stock actually gets any momentum. And we'll take a look at the Unmeta's chart, even though that one's just been disgusting. If I recall off memory, that stock was what over 300 or something dollars to start the year. It's now pushing what is this roughly right around now? Just around $90. So rather disgusting how much it's been beaten up. And I'm sure if I just look at the chart on the daily, it looks absolutely gross. All right. So that's another one. I think the other name that's pretty much big in the market here, it was Amazon, was the other one that has some recent headlines here this morning that popped up. I don't think it's anything relevant to what is going to dictate a bigger price action move to the upside or downside, but Amazon's reportedly going to be using their Rivian vehicles for basically for emission purposes, testing it out in about 100 cities. So that's something to monitor, see if that stock does anything. But relatively speaking, I think the Apple News and the Meta News is actually more so important to see how that structure ends up playing out for the day. All right. But again, that was the levels. My bigger concern is either how we end up holding 3782, we stay with and trending up towards the resistance of this wedge, or do we break down below the 3782? And I want to see the confirmation and the meltdown below 3766 before we get caught up in some chop. All right. But that was futures. I said I was going to get to Apple's chart here. Let's get to that right now as we are closing in about 5 minutes before the bell here. So taking a look at Apple's chart, I want to get out towards the daily here to give you a bigger picture, give you the bigger image that we're looking at. But looking at the daily, the bigger thing that stands out to me is that you can clearly see a nice little head and shoulders playing out. You see the left shoulder dating back towards May 19th, basically of this year. You see the head, and now that right shoulders will play it out after we got that massive gap down on it. So it's attempting to pretty much recover somewhat this morning earlier on, but now it's going right back down towards being down about a percent and a half. Now, resistance I was watching here, if it doesn't make another attempt to recover yet again, resistance I'm going to look for is roughly around 138.89 is what I'm watching for off of the daily. Otherwise, we're going to look for confirmation here. Look for a confirmation below 137.72, and that should end up continuing to break down. And that has room down actually towards 133.90 is what I'm looking at on the daily. All right. So this is going to be a very interesting one. If the market's going to hold support, as I was pretty much explaining on futures, then this may end up making a push to attempt to go green. In which case, that 138.89 resistance is going to be rather key to see if you get further momentum to the upside with the broader market, or is that going to be the spot where we actually get the ultimate buy the short spot, right? For this to reject and go right back down and break down towards that 133, call it 134 target that I am looking at. All right. So I would hope that we get the bounce more so off of Apple to get a better entry on the short is more so my mindset right now. If we can make the attempt to go green here, make a push at least towards 138, if not wick that 138.89, that would be my ideal spot to go short, and then we take this down to 134. All right. So this is definitely going to be one of the names that are pretty much at the top of my watch list, of course. Just knowing the fact that we have negative sentiment already on Apple. The market's trying to hold up. We may get one more push rather this morning before we end up getting a breakdown. I want to see if I can get a better entry on puts here rather on Apple before we end up trying to have to chase this down more so. All right, which I prevent from chasing down. But that again, the breakdown level here is below 135.72. I think that's when it's going to confirm the breakdown, and that should take you to that 133.90 spot. All right. AA, you mentioned Tesla. I haven't looked at Tesla this morning too much. There's more, usually mornings I pay attention to Tesla more so than others. Given the fact that we have more other names that actually have relative news, and I think they're gonna more so move. Speaking of Meta and speaking of Apple, of course, I was actually more so focused on those. But looking at Meta here, I actually have resistance sitting right around 211.09 is what I'm looking for resistance. Look to see if that's gonna be a morning short opportunity. Otherwise, above 211.09, you're watching 215 is what I have pretty much dead on the spot. and that should particularly actually be your overall resistance. So it would not shock me to see this actually trade up towards 215. I'll be honest with you, just because of the fact that we have the weakness with Amazon weighing us down, and the market may attempt to actually push. I could see Tesla actually being the name that actually shows relative strength. And if I'm not mistaken, it was on no, actually Friday it actually showed weakness. So this may be the day it actually shows some relative strength earlier on, with Apple being the name showing the weakness. So I'd watch for this to trade up towards that 215, but 211 is a spot you want to keep your eye on. Look to see if you get the rejection, and then you look for that short opportunity. As I don't anticipate this morning push on ES futures here are going to hold is my bigger sentiment that I want to express. All right. And I think that also aligns with what Avery's been also showing. I think he dropped it on the newsletter. If I'm not sure, he dropped it on swing trades this morning for his DEFCON reading. We're not expecting whatever push we particularly get today, whether it ends up lasting the entire day or not. We are not particularly expecting it to hold. Is the bigger question, bigger mark. All right. So again, key levels noted down: 211.09, 215. Those are your overhead resistance. Otherwise, we should look for this to confirm below 206 here. Below 206, that should break you down. And you're going to look to take out your low from Friday, sitting at that 203.30 spot. And that could potentially look to set in a new low here, 200.90, 200.75 is what I have noted. All right. So that's the other one. The other name I also wanted to bring to attention. Sorry about that. I was looking at something. Here's our opening bell. But really quickly, I also wanted to point out Meta. That was the other one, like I mentioned, and had news. I do see that it is pumping. Watching here off of, I believe the hourly here is more so what I wanted to see. Was watching this resistance that we had from prior little consolidation, prior distribution. Watching this up towards 99.5 is what I'm looking at. Of course, you have that 50-day EMA sitting at 97.92. But I would look to see if you get the overshoot to retest what was prior resistance of this distribution from the end of October, and that 99 point half spot may end up being where we see that overall resistance. All right. So it is up a lot. That's why I believe, I mean, it should maybe end up giving you a quick push to the upside, but I'm not banking on it. I mean, that 50-day EMA is more so the more key resistance at 97.89. But we could see support here. Support I'm watching would be roughly right around 92.89 is what I'm looking at for support. Otherwise, 92.89 doesn't hold. That's going to go for a full-on gap fill right back to the downside, as that would indicate that the morning little pop that we have is not going to particularly hold. All right. So that's what I'm looking at. I other things that are kind of in the news here. I know that Costco also had some news this morning. There was actually a downgrade by Wells Fargo saying that there's weakening in the consumer demand. So that was something else that caught my attention. We had Palantir news that came out. They actually were in line with their earnings more so or less with their revenue and their EPS. So that was something else that caught my attention. And I believe there was one other name, if I'm not mistaken, that I'm kind of drawing a blank on right now. Costco, Apple, Meta. Okay, no, actually, I covered all of them. Those are all pretty much the key names that actually had relative news this morning. Amazon was the one which I didn't mention. All right. So again, let's see the morning pop. I'll pretty much have futures up on the live stream here, which I will keep it up. We're likely trying to push over this 200-day EMA on the hourly here right now, over that 37.97 spot. Let's see if we can retest this double top action. That's what I'm more so concerned about. If we can end up retesting that and maybe end up rejecting that spot, that may be the most ideal spot to get an entry on puts. If we reject that 38.05 on futures, that might be that key spot that I may end up getting a starter position on my overall puts, which I'm looking at more so for SPY than individual tickers, particularly. All right, so 38.05. Let's see. We get this nice little morning push as it's making an attempt right now. 38.05. I want to see if I maybe end up getting a starter on that, but I want to see the rejection before I just jump the gun and I try to just enter in blindly. All right, because if we push over 38.05, then we may make a nice little push up towards the resistance at that 38.30 spot, in which case that may end up presenting itself as a better ideal entry for that short. All right. But other than that, I'm gonna hop into live voice for our standard members, and then I'll leave a stream up here for futures, as you guys can see that, see it play out in real time here right now. As I will keep the structure up, you can see the EMAs, you can see the resistance supports that I have outlined, and then you can go off of that and make your trades for the day. All right. But other than that, the other thing to keep in mind, as usually the market's waiting on data, we're gonna be waiting on that inflation data on Thursday. Keep in mind whether it may not even be today, we may end up trading in a range as we get closer to that Thursday, which of course I'll probably mention again tomorrow. But be mindful of that, especially if you're trying to go into longer dated positions, or more so weeklies. I want to say as more focused to. Be cautious about the fact that your premiums may get chopped up, and you may relatively actually more so decide to do a debit spread. That way, the chop won't necessarily eat you up with data wise. All right. But other than that, appreciate you guys joining as always. Again, I'll switch over to standard voice in Discord here, and I will leave the stream up for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. And then, yeah, you can see my levels, my supports, resistance, my EMAs all sitting up there. And look to see if we end up breaking this rising wedge or test the resistance. All right, guys. Other than that, stay safe out in these streets, and I will meet you guys, some of you actually in standard voice. All right. Later, guys.